Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
Hi, I am Jen Lothian. I'm co-founder and CEO of MyArk, which is the data solution to help businesses better understand and activate their customers, which means that we can eradicate abandonment when you're looking to onboard a customer into a bank, building. In fact, hold on, can I start that again?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I went a whole rogue into the business. I'm not going to do that.
I'm going to keep all this. No, I'm joking.
I mean, you can do like the bloopers, like no, because I end up going too far in a different direction. It's like, no, just answer the exam question, which is introduce yourself. Right, start that again. Hi, Greg. So I'm Jen Lothian, co-founder and CEO of MyArk.
Oh, right. You meant you were going to do a short one. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's the. Some people try and beat the record for longest. I think you would 100% beat the record for the shortest. So well done.
Oh.
But yeah, look, it's great to see you again. Yeah, like I was saying, like before we click record, it's been ages since we originally spoke. So I think it was like the beginning. It must have been the beginning of the year or beginning of summer or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fair few months ago.
Yeah. So, and have you just closed your round at that point, or I can't remember? Were you just closing or just started it?
No, what we were doing was we raised. Up until now, we've raised small check angels, which has given us kind of a huge amount of flexibility plus support. We've been very fortunate with the kind of credibility of angels we brought on board. So we have everybody from one of the board members of Electrolux. We've got a bunch of exited CTOs, cybersecurity experts. So people who are only one, everybody is either somebody that one of us, there's three of us in the team that one of us knows and has worked with, or just 1 degree removed, which is amazing.
Right.
And so a lot of the reason why we've kind of managed to get investment from those individuals is because they have, I think, a faith in our ability to deliver, which is wonderful. But it also means that they are real supporters of what we're doing and have gone above and sort of beyond to help us. And so that's allowed us to go through the kind of the product iteration stage. We're solving quite a knotty problem that we've been told on a number of occasions can't be solved. And I think we are there now. But we needed the flexibility to solve that. And so, yeah,
I mean,
we're
that's
now
just asking for it, isn't it? When people say it can't be solved, that's just like, you know, it's like, all right, bring it on, you know, never say that to an entrepreneurial person. You know what I mean?
No. I actually put a very silly post on LinkedIn, which is a picture of Olaf, you know, the snowman from Frozen skating down going, you know, to everybody who hears it can't be done and their response is hold my drink and watch me. I think there's a definite cohort of individual that is simply a red rag to a bull.
100%. I think I'm one of those people, you know. Yeah, it probably stems from having a similar treatment in school. You know what I mean? But I don't know. Well, maybe we'll get into that in a minute. But no, but that's great. I mean, and it's great that you managed to have this network. We'll definitely get more into the fundraising element of it, and that, you know, we're kind of jumping ahead a bit actually of what I wanted to ask you about. But that's great that you've got those individuals who've invested in the company that have had some sort of exposure to your ability to deliver. Do you know what I mean? Which is probably why they have in the first place, right? So that's fantastic. So, but let's take a step back because of you know, I want to. Let the world know a bit more about who you are, really, first, before we kind of get more into MyArk, because it is super interesting what you've built. And like you said, kind of solving problems that were seemingly unsolvable. But tell me about your background. I know a little bit about it from when we previously spoke, but remind me. Presume I've forgotten it all.
So I have a non-standard background, which I think is very standard for entrepreneurs, arguably. So I started.
That's a contradiction, a conundrum there, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, other than, you know, the odd waitressing job and everything else, my first kind of proper job was I was just 18 and I went and joined the army, which was a bit unexpected because I don't have a military family. I grew up in central London. You don't get central London women joining the military as a general rule. And it was back frighteningly in 1999. So the world was a very, very different place. To put it in context, I remember the day it became legal to be gay in the military. That's where we were in 1999. And I did a year. There used to be a program where you could have 4 whole weeks of training as somebody who turned 18 a couple of days before. and then get thrown into the regular army as a junior officer, which I did. And I did everything from jungle training in Belize through to other building bridges and all sorts of things. And then took to it despite all odds. So that was probably my first time I was told, you really can't do it. And I was like, oh, I really can. And then they sponsored me through uni.
Who was telling you that?
Oh, everybody. So like to be a female at that time, to go into the officers' mess, you had to wear a skirt. I was the 41st female ever to join the Royal Engineers, who have up to different times had well over 100,000 members. I was a very academic, so I had the art scholarship and the physics scholarship for my sixth form. I went to private sixth form because I got scholarships. And yeah, I was absolutely not the expected profile as a, person going into the military. So yeah, to put it in context, half the boys in my school stopped talking to me because they were so appalled that the military would accept somebody like me into the ranks. And then
appalled or intimidated?
I mean, they said appalled. Maybe both. And then and then when I actually went on to the course, there was only me and one other guy, a really nice chap called Jake, who hadn't done loads of military stuff. So there were real kind of geeky cadet kids there, who really knew what they were doing. And I didn't know what I was doing. My first feedback session, as it's now called, it wasn't called that then, it was like watching a fish out of water floundering helplessly around. So, the first week went swimmingly.
So a bit like being a founder, really.
Exactly. Comfortable and uncomfortable. But oddly, I took to it. And I think, a big part of the military, and arguably a big part of being a founder, is having kind of the real humility to accept that you literally know nothing. And then having the kind of stubborn optimism that you can figure it out, and certainly just saying, I'm going to give it everything. And then, particularly in the military, people kind of really respect you just giving it everything and getting on with it. There's a real just get on with it, get it done. It's going to be tough. You're not expected to know everything type mindset. And so I ended up taking to it, and all because I've got better from week 2 onwards. And then they ended up sponsoring me through university. So I did a normal BSc economics degree, but worked kind of 2 or 3 days a week for the army, teaching infantry skills to TA and OTC, as a territorial army, part-time army, and then rejoined back up and did another 5 full years before then leaving.
Amazing. I mean, you said that it was like, totally unexpected, and not, you weren't the typical person, like you said, a woman from London to go to the army. What on earth possessed you to do it? Like, what gave you that idea? Where did that come from? Because like you said, no one was in your family had done it, so it wasn't that. So where did that come from?
It's a really embarrassing answer. So I was very young for my I was very young for my year, and so when I left, I was still 17. I was going to go traveling with one of my friends. My friend then had to do other things for the degree that she got accepted into, so I said I'd go traveling by myself. And my poor beleaguered mum was like, no chance that you're wadding off around the world by yourself at 17. And so in the very precocious manner that only a 17-year-old can muster, I said, well, find me something more interesting. And if you ever seen the film Private Benjamin, it literally was that. She was like, oh, because this is like pre-Iraq, pre-Afghanistan, like the world was a very different place. She was like, oh, you could go and join the army for a year. I found this thing where you could go and join the army for a year. And you could do things like skiing and fun outdoors, climbing things like that. Because I've always been quite into sort of slightly more extreme sports. And had no idea what was actually going to kind of come out of it, that it was really like joining the actual proper real life army. And so I walked into the Charing Cross branch of the army recruitment, or military recruitment. There was a RAF, a Navy and an army guy. And you've never seen 3 men look away so quickly. I mean, it was literally like, please don't come to me, please don't come to me. And on reflection, I was wearing a bright pink polo neck. I had a sparkly pink Nokia phone, long before the word smartphone, with really high heels and peroxide blonde hair as a 17-year-old chick. And no wonder they looked away. Anyway, the army guy was not thrilled when I walked over to him. And yeah, that was sort of the end of that.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, so you were in the army for around 5 or 6 years, is that right? Did I
On and off for
calculate that
9,
correctly?
if you include the
On and off for
degree.
9. Okay,
Yeah.
right. So presumably you went on tour at some point.
Yeah, so I did Afghanistan in 2007, which was pretty kinetic. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, certainly kind of one of the worst times to be there. And I did less kinetic tours. So I was in Cyprus under the UN and part of the evacuation of Lebanon in 2006. And then I did some jungle stuff in Belize, was based in Germany. So it's certainly, I went in knowing I had a very nasty accident at Sandhurst. Sandhurst is where you train to be an officer. I was on a motorbike with my boyfriend and he crashed and died in the accident. And I was very badly injured and spent a year having multiple reconstructive surgeries and in rehabilitation units because I kind of lost use of one of my arms and needed to get that back. And so I had quite a big kind of recovery cycle there. So because of those injuries, I knew I wasn't ever going to be in for the long term. But managed to get myself fit enough to go back into kind of the main cohort and then was accepted back into the artillery and was like, if I'm only going to be here for a few years, I'm going to make the most of it. And so fortunate, I did well enough to choose which regiment I went to. So I chose a regiment that was deploying to Afghanistan in support of the Marines. And that was that experience. And then kind of at the end of that period of time, left as per the plan. And so I've been out of the military for over 15 years now, frighteningly.
Wow, I was totally unaware of that incident, that accident. I'm so sorry. That sounds absolutely horrendous. Yeah, I mean, and fair play to you for I mean, not only dealing with that situation at the time the way you did but I mean, like most people probably would have, just moved away from the military at that point and gone into rehabilitation. But for you to jump straight back in and to do what you did, that's incredibly admirable. Way better way of handling it than I think I probably would have, to be completely honest. So
I don't know. I think it became very apparent very quickly that life is full of choices. You just don't necessarily like the choices that you have. And I either had, I was either going to be in a situation where James had died, he'd lost his life and his career and everything else. And then I would lose my career trajectory and choices as well. Or I was going to fight really hard to get well enough and fixed enough to go back in and, at least then be the owner of my own choice, be the owner of my own destiny. It was a very grotty time, but equally I only got better because I had the most extraordinary support. I was very broken, so my mum had to stop working so she could care for me full time initially, and then I went back into Sandhurst, where we joke about this weekend actually, where my girlfriends at Sandhurst all had to take turns they moved all the blokes into one of the other lines so I could have a corridor with just girls in, and they all had to take turns to kind of wash me and dress me. So it was pretty dramatic at the time. But the other option was kind of sitting at home. And I also wouldn't have recovered if I hadn't gone back to Sandhurst. So my prognosis was pretty bad.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
But because I was back in the rehabilitation unit, I was with some of the kind of thought leaders in rehabilitation and had a lot of support.
So there was like a really high standard of care there that you wouldn't have got elsewhere.
Anywhere else, no. I mean, the military is exceptional at rehabilitation. So if you're going to be anywhere, be in the military, not sat at home or in a hospital. And a big part of that isn't just the physical, it's the psychological. So when this probably won't land very well with non-military viewers, but after Afghanistan, obviously a lot of people were having it was a time when there was a lot of fatalities and when there was a lot of very significant injuries. And some of my guys had been very significantly injured, and they were up in the hospital in Selly, which is where kind of very big traumas go and do some initial rehab. And we all went out to the local cafe and were sat in the cafe just to get them out of the hospital for a little bit. And everybody's just absolutely taking the mick out of each other. and some pretty dark humour. But the part of that is it's to not victimize people. It's not to mollycoddle people. It's not to be like, oh, it's so awful, you must be so depressed. Because then you're like, shit, I should be depressed. It's actually, there's a little bit of that banter and that camaraderie, and that, it can initially, you can be like, oh my gosh. But actually, I think it allows you to have a healthy psychological recovery as well as a healthy physical recovery. And arguably the psychological recovery is more important.
But yeah, because it drives the physical recovery, right? If you don't have the will, then you don't have the way. I mean, as cliche as that sounds, but it's true, isn't it? It's interesting what you said there about the banter and stuff too, because that's something that I think you're in a primarily very traditionally male-dominated environment, right? And still, to a degree. And so there's that element of banter and stuff like that, and you're painting it in a good light. And I'm really glad to hear that, because as a man who that comes very naturally to, and always has, with a group of blokes sat around. It's something that we are quite proud of, and if for people that don't understand it, it can seem mean spirited, or it can seem potentially troublesome or whatever. But it's really not. Like it's about not taking yourself too seriously. It's about knocking each other down a peg, so your ego doesn't grow. But not you know what I mean. It's about there's so many things, and ultimately it's about affection. It's about showing affection. And it might seem a bit backwards if you're not used to that, but you know what I mean? Like, do you have you ever been in a position where you've had to kind of had to defend that kind of culture, which again, I think it is a pretty male trait. Have you ever had to try and defend that to other women who've maybe been outside of that, and kind of seen it from both sides?
I position it
not to get too massively off track, which
no, but why not? I put it slightly differently, because whilst there weren't a lot of women when I was at Sandhurst, when I went through, it was all female platoons, and I'm still really close friends. And I was in 2 different platoons because I was injured, and then I was also with the injured people for a while. So I've got some of my closest girlfriends and guy friends are from that period of my life, which is quite transformatory. And I would say that some of my girlfriends' banter is more brutal than some of my bloke friends' banter. And because it tends to be kind of the banter, but kind of that extra level of erudite and cutting. And so whilst I think it can traditionally be more of a male trait, I wouldn't undersell the capability of female banter. I think it's more about...
no, absolutely not.
I think it's... but you're right, it tends to be kind of more in male environments. So I was in the army, then I went into investment banking, and now I'm a data AI founder, right? It's a real... there's a theme there. I think where the banter works really well is where it's well intended. And that's something I was always kind of comfortable with through the military, was... if it's not malintended, you can kind of say what you want. I'm not going to take offense. And I'd rather somebody took the mick, to your point, because it's just about not taking yourself too seriously, taking the job really seriously, but therefore you need to have an emotional outlet. And kind of the banter and the black humor is part of that. And particularly when you're in really difficult environments, like psychologically, there's a lot of research done on it. You need to have an outlet where you're not constantly in that kind of hypervigilant state. But where I don't like the banter is where it is not well intended. And that can come in the military, that can come in banking, that can come for men and for women. I think traditionally women don't, or certainly my experience is women don't tend to use banter to knock people down. They just tend to be a bit more cutting and passive aggressive. Whereas, blokes taking the mick can be a way of couching their opinion, and that's when I kind of take umbrage with it. But certainly, I'd say the only time I've kind of had to defend it is particularly when you come back from combat. That's a lot to process, and your conversation has changed. You've been together living in a trench for months at a time, and you've been shot at and blown up every day, and you've been in this crazy kind of heightened state of vigilance. You've never slept for more than a few hours at a time because you're then taking turns to stag on the radio or whatever else. The whole dialogue changes and it becomes more abrupt. And I was basically at the end of a radio for most of my time I was out there. And when you speak on a radio, you speak in a very specific, very concise way. And I'm speaking with people who only really want to talk about football and boobs, neither of which I have any particular interest in. And so then when you come back home, there is a recalibration exercise that needs to go on where you use whole sentences, you try and swear less, you're reminded what makeup is. And so there's a piece there. And I think what can be hard is people don't recognize that there is a transition phase that needs to happen. And people expect people to come out of any extreme environment and flip back to normal. And that's just not how the brain works. You've got to give people and their brains time to recalibrate. So it's just very, very different. And my brother works in the humanitarian sector. So he's lived all over the world, in Central African Republic, where you have to have armed guards and live in various accommodation. And so we've spoken about it quite a lot, that it's not necessarily about military, it's about living in a very different environment. And so I'm very respectful whenever he comes home after a long kind of posting, that he needs time to recalibrate and adjust and give him that kind of capacity to do so. So yeah, I think Banter is wonderful. I think Banter is an underestimated thing in 2024. I think it's all about being well intended, and then. But I think it is very
intention
very...
matters and context matters, right? And that I think that's the thing that people often miss, in both ways, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, there are times where people do use it to very thinly veil bad intentions too. But I think at the end of the day, it's if you have a good relationship with someone, then you can. That's a good starting point.
Yeah.
But,
my husband and I.
That's super interesting. Sorry.
No, I was just saying my husband and I have that as well. So we take the mick out of each other a lot. But we arguably have very
likewise with my wife and I.
Yeah, we have great communication because we never let anything fester. We just say, and I won't say, don't be such a bleep, bleep, bleep. And he's like, and then it's over. There isn't like a festering thing. So I think there is a again, because we both know it comes from a place of well-intended root cause rather than, anything else. Sounds like you've got the same.
That's a really good point. I never really thought about that. My wife and I are the same. We're very open and honest about if we've annoyed each other, we sit each other down and go, look, can you stop doing that particular thing? This is the way it makes me feel. Do you mind? When we talk things through, or we give each other feedback on things, whether it's and this, it's not very often, to be honest, but it's not really about how we treat each other in the marriage. That for some reason we've never had an issue with in our relationship. It's more about parenting, that kind of thing. Like have you considered maybe if we try this, or and it's all very open and respectful and everything like that. But then we do banter a lot, and we always have from day one. And what's really interesting is that it's only just occurred to me now is we never use banter as a way to try and jab at each other. Do you know what I mean? Because we're already getting it all out in the open. The banter is all about trying to make each other laugh, or just trying to see who can piss off the other one the most. Basically, like that's basically it. And it's never used for that. And I think that's really important because we get it all out properly and in a mature and grown up way. So it's never accidentally kind of pushed into that domain, which is strictly for fun and affection, which I think is how it should be, and to see who we can get the biggest laugh, basically. That's and
particularly when you've got kids as an audience as well, you've then got extra people you can wind up and bring into the mix. One of the first things my husband taught my son to say was "chop chop wifey," which my poor son didn't know what he was saying. We got lots of video of this very small toddler going "chop chop wifey," which amused my husband for about 18 months.
Yeah. My 9-year-old in the last year or so has been trying to do the banter thing, and he's just not getting it. Like he's just really not getting it. Like because his friends they're the TikTok generation, so they're all they're looking at stuff like that, and to them it's like the stuff on YouTube and TikTok of people just being rude to each other. And so when he tries to do it, he's just really rude. I'm like, dude, what are you saying? Like, how dare you say that to your mother? Like, that's totally I was like, oh, I thought it was a joke. I'm like, no, you just straight up cussed out your mum. Don't say that again. I was like, if you don't understand banter, just don't do it, please.
Observe for a little bit longer. I will teach you, my Padawan. Yeah, it's like, not yet.
Exactly. That's what I keep telling him. I'm like, no, mate, just watch. Because then when my brother visits my mum, like, that's it. We're all ripping the crap out of each other. And then he chimes in, and everyone's like, whoa, calm down, kid. Yeah. But, he tries, bless him. He does try, but he'll get there. But going back to what you're mentioning as well is something that stood out in what you were saying too. Is at least what it made me think about. I've just got to quickly interrupt this episode for a quick announcement, and that is that if you are a tech founder, a CEO, a business owner, well, the chances are that's probably why you're listening to this show. It is called Founders Unplugged after all. And if that's the case, then you really need to listen to what I've got to say. So look, as someone that's been in the tech startup world now for a very, very long time, and as a founder and worked with lots of businesses globally, working in those companies has taught me a really big lesson. And that is that finding the right tools for your team can truly change your business. That's why I'm really excited that today's episode is sponsored by Deal. That's Deel. It's an all-in-one platform for global teams. Deal is designed with the needs of a global workforce in mind. Seamless contract signing, easy expense uploads, in-platform time off management. They can handle paperwork, exchange foreign salaries into local ones, and ensure compliance with local regulations, and loads more. Plus, its customer support team is available 24/7, and that is really, really important. If you're ready to see how Deal can transform your global operations, head to deal.com. That's Deel.com to book your demo today. So thank you so much for Deal for sponsoring today's episode. You can use the link in the description or the QR code on the screen down there somewhere. And now we'll get back to the episode. Was this idea of purpose, right? Like, to go through that accident. And by the way, was your, if you don't mind me asking, was your boyfriend who passed away at the time, was he in the military as well?
Yeah, we met at Sandhurst, so we were both there together. Did? Okay. Yeah, and we were on his bike going back to Sandhurst when it happened. So yeah. So
sorry, my condolences. But yeah, no, it just made me think about this idea of purpose. You were saying about how you kind of, what sort of got you through that was obviously being there, being with your colleagues and all the support and everything like that. But I would assume that there's a certain amount of purpose that comes with that, which is really driving you through it too. Like, that you're doing important work, you're serving your country, you're doing a highly skilled job. You're there to, presumably, there's probably a sense of responsibility. I'd imagine, I got this from speaking with other military people that I've known, that there tends to be a feeling of responsibility for your unit, for your teammates, right? So would you say that, I'm just thinking, like, just sort of freestyling here, but would you say that sense of purpose was what kind of drew you to go back in there, as well as all the other sort of reasons you pointed out, as opposed to maybe feeling a little bit purposeless if you went into civilian life and kind of recovered that way?
Yeah, I think I'd split what you said into two different halves, because one of them would be me being disingenuous if I
That's
said
probably
the
best way to do it when I talk, because I say all kinds of crazy shit, and you have to. I would be completely disingenuous to say that I went back for a higher purpose. I went back because I needed a purpose, and I think they're two different things. I needed a focus and and something to do with myself that was part of a goal. Whereas anybody who's been, chronically or systemically injured, over a long period of time, knows that it can be very untethering, and that it can completely kind of throw your world off its axis. All the things you knew to be true are no longer true, and that's really discombobulating. And so certainly, kind of having a goal and having a target, and certainly because I was badly injured, trying to get less badly injured. We didn't think I'd recover at the time, but certainly to get less badly injured was a really helpful North Star to kind of go towards. And so I'd love to say I went back for a higher purpose. I went back for very selfish reasons. When you are then in your unit, things are slightly different. So
and actually all the way through training as well, when you're in the training, what you're doing is never as an individual. It is all about kind of the collective outcome. And they're actually very good at somewhat indoctrinating you into the collective outcome. And the motto of Sandhurst is serve to lead, which I still think is very pertinent for me today. But when you're then deployed, it's a great motto. But when you're then, whether it's being on a commandeered cruise ship to evacuate Lebanon or going into the retaking of Musakala, you're never there as an individual. You're there as a cog in a wheel. And there's a thing in the army called leader's legs. So when you're going for a run, you never feel as tired if you're running with your troop, your soldiers, because you've got to be the one, geeing everybody else on and keeping everybody else going. And so you kind of forget about yourself a bit. And I think that's very true in those circumstances. So when we first got on the Chinook to take us out to our first location outside of Camp Bastion in Afghanistan, it's absolutely terrifying. I was very terrified, but particularly when you're the boss, you can show no fear. And so actually you kind of get over yourself a bit, and it gives you an extra level of conviction, because what you're about isn't about you, it's about kind of the collective. And I think a lot of people, when they leave the military, it's a big adjustment, because you are not only maybe working in a more self-serving environment, but you are not working as a cohesive collective in the way that you've been used to. Because I think there's two pieces to the military piece, which was certainly when Afghanistan kicked off. There's lots of commentary, lots of opinions around whether it was the right thing to do or not, and I think a lot of us were very conflicted. But you have a responsibility for your guys, and making sure that everybody behaves in the right way, and you come out having done the very best that you can do. So there's a real purpose.
Yeah. Well, you put it way more eloquently than I was attempting to, but yeah, that's incredible. So okay, so you recovered remarkably, and then you said you went back in for a few years, then retired. Mm-hmm. So what happened at that point? What did you do with yourself after that?
So I left the army, and for an easy life, I went into investment banking. Why not? It's a complete lack of imagination. My dad was an accountant, and I'd done an economics degree, so it sort of made sense to just go into finance. I had no idea about entrepreneurial world or anything other than kind of the real mainstream, doctor, lawyer, mainstream roles. And again, it's something that people struggle when you leave the military, particularly if you've joined when you're young. You haven't got exposure to kind of all the nuances of different roles and opportunities that are out there. It feels very much, like when you're at primary school, do you want to be a firefighter or a policeman type thing? And so through kind of sheer lack of imagination, I ended up in investment banking. And that was when I first had my exposure to technology. So I didn't know what a server was when I started, which is mortifying on reflection. But I got brought in. It's when Bank of America and Merrill Lynch were being smashed together. And there was all sorts of issues as a result of that. So this is like 2008, 2009. And we were having lots of big technical outages, and they lost a data center at one point, which, again, at that time when we didn't really have cloud services in the same way, was absolutely catastrophic. And they realized they didn't have a skill set in-house for people who could manage effectively these huge international incidences. If a data center goes out for an investment bank, you're talking about hundreds of people looking to address it in multiple different streams of work across different apps about the actual data center itself, the infrastructure, the networks, firewalls, security, that whole piece. And so they end up creating 3 roles globally to come in with the awful name of super triage, to be the person, one in EMEA, one in AMAS, and one in APAC, to be the coordinator for these sort of giant catastrophes. But fortunately, the catastrophes don't happen that often, although they were happening quite often at the time. And so in quite short order, I ended up taking over the team globally. And then I brought on board both the legacy Merrill and the legacy Bank of America major technology incident support. So we formed a global kind of 365 team for everything from DDoS attacks through to the time that we lost the trading floor in New York, somebody cut a power cable. all the way through to, you know, people not being able to have access to Moscow because there was an issue and blah, 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 blah. So I ended up running that for a year and a half.
Can I just say, and this might be completely out of the blue, but you are a remarkable human being.
It's a very mortifying thing to say, Greg.
No, you really no, I mean that in a positive way. I mean, you are really remarkable, because it sounds to me like, you know, really you just seem to excel in almost any situation you're thrown into. I mean, is this something that you're aware of? I mean, you know, really not trying to make you feel awkward or uncomfortable here, but
I
it's
feel
just
really
something
awkward.
that I have to observe. I'm so sorry that made you feel that, but it's an observation. You know, this show is all about me being honest. Like, you know, it's amazing. You seem to be thrown into so many of these, you know, quite unusual scenarios, or, you know, not thrown into them. You also elected to be into them, but then, you know, you seem to excel. Like, is it something that you're aware of, that you seem to excel in particularly challenging scenarios? Is it something you're aware of at all, or you at any time been aware of, or where do you think you get that from? I know I've literally just thrown so many questions at you, but it's just remarkable.
Yeah, British ex-military, great with compliments. But moving on from that, trying to get over like slight mortification.
It is such a British thing, isn't it, for us to get uncomfortable around being complimented?
So uncomfortable.
Like, if anyone's watching overseas, they're just like, "What's going on here?" Like, they're just not going to get it.
Literally, like,
even
hiding.
Giving it, I knew I was going to make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, really uncomfortable. Thank you for that sharing. I know I'm pretty good in a crisis, and
right.
I have. So I did that role, and then I went to go and work on the trading floor, looking at how we kind of looked at all of the prime. I was chief of staff role in prime brokerage, looking at how we made money there and recalibrating the logic and the systems around that. And then I went and did the Windows XP upgrade was failing behind globally, so I went to go and run that, and I had 10 months to transform 25,000 devices across 15 countries. So that was pretty grotty as well. I think there's lots of environments where I'm not excellent. So kind of business as usual, anything that involves attention to detail. My CTO will tell you that I am appalling. I'm the queen of typos.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just the sentence says what it needs to say, whether there's an R there or not, doesn't really matter. But I
okay.
breaks him. And my last kind of proper job before this, I was put in because I'd worked for the chair of the board before, and they were like, we need somebody to come and do chief of staff in the run up to an IPO, and there were some challenges, and you know, you're the person that can come and deal with those challenges, which doesn't make for an easy life. I think there's a lesson in there. As one of my friends has said to me, you know, just because you can doesn't mean you should, and that's something I maybe should have learned before my 40s, but. I think I'm quite good at seeing through the noise. So, you know, and certainly in kind of startup world, you see it a lot. There's so much to do. It's very easy to get bogged down by different bits and pieces. But I think, you know, I'm quite good at seeing what the end objective is and then working backwards from that and then figuring out what needs to be done to get there. And then through sheer blooming force of will, finding a way to make that happen, which I think doesn't always make me the easiest person to work for in the past. Now, as both Kathy and Luke will attest, I am very all in, and I will find a way through sheer will to make something happen, which isn't everybody's cup of tea, right? Most normal humans like just, you know, maybe work 9 to 5, and there's a healthiness in that approach. But again, you know, I think there's an area in which I am better than, you know, disproportionately good at, which is being really comfortable in the uncomfortable, not really knowing what I'm doing, but being able to surround myself with people who do, and then consolidate that information and get to a good outcome.
Yeah. Well, a good answer to a very uncomfortable question, so I appreciate you entertaining that.
Yeah, cheers for that.
You're welcome. But no, I truly, I think it's just worth saying, you know, and I always say what I think most of the time. So you went from, like you say, so for investment banking, then went onto the trading floor, then that chief of staff role, and then you founded MyArk. Is that have I got the timeline right? No,
there's a whole pile of stuff in the middle. So I did investment banking for the instant management thing, then I did chief of staff on the trading floor thing, then I did the Windows. I decided the trading floor wasn't for me. I'm a really big fan of integrity.
Right.
And so there was a moral compass misalignment.
So there was a misalignment. Okay.
Yeah, we'll leave it there. Moral compass misalignment. So I went back into technology and did the Windows upgrade, moved my wedding so that we can make that happen, because that's a lunatic that I am. And then wanted to go and work somewhere that was smaller, because the problem with working somewhere as big as Bank of America, so it's 3 times the size of the British Army, to put it in context, is everything is like moving the Titanic. It's a big beast. You need a lot of energy just to kind of navigate the environment.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
Wow.
And I was also pretty intrigued as to whether I would be successful somewhere other than Bank of America, because I was treated very well there. I was given a lot of opportunity. I worked very hard for the opportunity. But you do kind of question, am I doing well here because I fit this environment, or could I be successful somewhere else? So I went to go and work at Octopus Group, initially to run all of their kind of change and delivery, so all their regulatory change, tech change, etc. And then I did sort of a chief of staff role there as well for the COO, CFO, who was an amazing lady. And we're doing a big org restructure at the time, so that was really interesting. And then my final role there was effectively a COO role for an incubated startup for equity release mortgages. And that's the first time I got to work on what I'd call a greenfield site, because up until then I'd done a lot of unpicking of really knotty, complicated problems. Like we did a data transformation at Octopus, and some of the stuff we were unpicking at Bank of America wasn't for the faint of heart. And so it was very refreshing being able to go, right, we've got quite literally a blank piece of paper, build an entire business. Like, how do the process, systems, operations, finances, legal structure, reg requirements, everything from zero up. And I really enjoyed that. So that was my first foray into the startup world. And then after that,
really getting your hands dirty at that point.
Yeah, really getting your hands dirty, which was really fun and so much easier than trying to unpick legacy tech, as anybody who unpicks legacy tech will know. And then I ended up going to work. Somebody who I'd been a client of was buying a small data business, so I did the SPA for them, and then worked as the interim MD for that role, because it was a sort of distressed buyout. So I think having an interim role there is really helpful, because you can make all the difficult decisions and sort of recalibrate, and then somebody can come in fresh, and so that worked really well. And did a bit more kind of data transformation work, again still as a consultant in a company like Pantheon Private Equity. And then my last proper role before MyArk was I was chief of staff and kind of responsible for data readiness for the largest non-banking commodities brokerage en route to a 1.4 billion IPO.
Wow, amazing. And so then that then takes us to MyArk, I assume.
Correct.
From that point. So where did that come from? What was the spark that lit the fuse for MyArk?
Yeah, fueled by gin. I was genuinely true. I also managed to persuade Kathy, my co-founder, to come on board through the medium of whiskey. So there's a theme. I've done some quite knotty data transformation projects, and one thing I became very, very clear to me when I was doing my kind of last chief of staff role was any decision maker can't make the best decisions without the best information available. And so if somebody's withholding information, if the environment isn't such that people feel comfortable sharing information, if information isn't available, if data isn't available, you're making decisions in a very imperfect environment. And even if you're the best decision maker, because there are people who are good at decisions and people who are bad at decisions, even if you're the best decision maker, you are it's almost impossible to make the right decision without the right information. And so a big part of my role in that job was making sure that the right information got to the CEO at the right time. And I did spend a lot of time kind of thinking about the importance of that. And so it was very much in kind of the forefront of my mind. And then as well, MyArk is an amazing business. It's done exceptionally well. But it's got everything from structured derivatives to crypto to, the largest trader on the London's metal exchange, which is the last exchange to be manned in person, people actually in the exchange, through to physical oil trading. And so you've got all of these different products, and it's completely international, so super, super complicated. And you need to basically say, right, what does customer A make me? And from when you're publicly listed, nobody cares if they're working with the crypto guys or the physical oil guys, and they're completely different teams. And somebody like BP, for example, is hugely complex and multiple different legal entities. You need to find a way to get the one bit of information that you need out of that. So we were working on a pretty knotty problem, trying to solve all of that, which we did. But at the same time, one of my friends was going through a not very pleasant divorce, and I was up with her till 1 o'clock in the morning with a bottle of wine and a pen and a piece of paper, filling out her child maintenance form, which is the form you have to fill out when you get divorced, which talks about all the costs of childcare and blah, 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 blah. And it just struck me as absolutely insane that, we've got dozens of people, millions of pounds being spent on understanding how these businesses work. And yet we're in a situation where with consumer data, we don't know what our home cost us, or our car's going to cost us next year, or how much our kids cost us, or if we want to know that, we need the right information, and we can't get hold of the right information to understand that. And so that was really the initial spark for MyArk, was we have the capability from a technical and knowledge perspective to help people make better decisions. But from a personal perspective, we can't make the right decisions for us and our family because we don't have the right data availability. So that was the original kind of spark of the idea.
Right. So what happened at that point? You had that spark, but I'm assuming you didn't just, go, right, I'm going to quit my job now and go and build this thing. So what was the process from there? How long did you sit on it? How long did you work on it? Talk me through that.
Yeah, so I'd actually resigned very amicably, but anybody who's been through an IPO knows that it is a tough gig. It's a really tough gig. So
why is that?
Oh, it's exhausting.
We'll get back to the original question, but you've intrigued me now. So why is that? Because I haven't been through an IPO. So
okay, trying to articulate it in the right way. It's for anything,
and a way that doesn't get you into legal trouble.
Yeah, maybe. Anything where there's thanks for that, Greg. Anything where there's very high stakes crystallizes people's mindset and brings out different behaviors in people, and everybody's got shares and got vested interests, and everybody has their own history, and then you've got a huge amount of work that needs to be done. And I always used to wonder why kind of M&A people work so hard, because I had lots of friends who worked in those spaces, both from kind of a legal and a banking perspective. And you've got the interns who are like dying on their feet. And it's because there's, for people that don't know, from a regulatory perspective, you have quite tight timelines to deliver certain things. And so you have to have sort of set of accounts that then you only have a certain amount of time after those accounts that you can use those. And so if you don't hit all these deadlines, everything sort of falls over and takes like an extra year or however long. So everybody's up against the wall. Right. There's a huge amount of work to be done. I mean, again, anybody who's gone through an IPO, the volume of change that needs to happen is gargantuan. You've got multiple different engaged parties. So we had Goldman and JP Morgan. You've got all sorts of different law firms that need to be involved from different angles. You're looking to seek buyers, because when you list, you don't just go and hope people buy you. You have predetermined buyers. You've got boards, you've got audit requirements, you've got a very big change in the regulatory requirements to go from one to the other. So it's just a lot, and you've got dozens of hundreds and hundreds of people all working to this whilst also trying to do their day job. And then if anything hasn't been done, like nothing ever is. Anybody who works in startup world knows that you kind of make things happen. But then when you go to IPO, the system's fit for purpose, there's a data fit for purpose, people's contracts fit for purpose. Everything needs to be reviewed. So it's just a sheer volume, a lot to do in a very short timeline with very high stakes, creates a real hothouse of an environment to go through that process. And particularly, it was during the time, I know I'm not allowed to say the word because it triggers things, but during the time of great illness in this country. And so people...
And the world.
And the world. and so we were trying to manage that globally. So we had very different circumstances in the different countries at different times. And we were having to deal with, trading generally doesn't map very well to working from home. We had a lot of people that have never worked from home in their life. So that was a very big shift. We had people who were stuck in the wrong countries and their families were in other countries. So just in terms of a big, hairy, complex beast, it was a big, hairy, complex beast. And it was very, very long hours and very, very high tempo. So I was there for about a year and a bit, 18 months. And you get to the bit just before you list, and there's not much more that you can do. And so at that point I was like, I'm pretty much on the edge of burnout. I'm going to amicably leave.
So you bowed out at that point.
Bowed out gracefully, but definitely needed to bow out. And so for a few months, so I was on gardening leave. For a few months, I very much just sort of sat on the sofa and recalibrated. And then around December, January time, I started looking for other jobs. And it's the first time ever I'd really had time out. And so I was looking for the roles, and I got very lucky. I got offered a couple of roles, and I had absolutely no desire to do them whatsoever. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Thank God I'm getting offered jobs, always helpful. But, do I want to do them was the big question. And so, I started thinking one night, if I could do anything, what would I do? Because I never in a million years thought I'd be an entrepreneur. And this sort of kernel of an idea started to come up, which was, it's all about we haven't got the right information to make the right decisions. And that can be really impactful, specific at certain times and certain scenarios. And so I ended up, just to kind of put a line in the sand, that was sort of in March 22. So within a couple of days, I'd registered the company name, simply because it was almost like it kind of forces you to think about something. But I was still then looking for some jobs and sort of mulling on whether this was something to be sensible to do or not. And then I actually started in earnest in that July. I decided I wouldn't. I got off another couple of jobs and I turned them down. So I was like, right, I'm just going to give this a go. And it got off to quite a rocky start. So I had somebody who I know from old who said they'd come on board kind of as an interim CTO. Their head wasn't in the game. Their company that they'd founded had just been bought out. I think they thought they would have a lot more time than they did. And so we had kind of the first 6 months was a bit of a disaster in terms of we brought on a junior developer, mid-level developer, very lovely guy to work for him, but he didn't get the support he needed. And so my learning with that was, you've got to be aligned in terms of your commitment and your focus to building a startup. And it's not something you can do in the sideline because you're learning so quickly. And so I had to make this horrible decision in January 23, which was we basically need to stop and start again. And so very amicably, we all parted ways, but that was kind of the only option. And we basically consigned everything that we'd built for 6 months onto the scrap heap and started again. So I think of the real kind of birth of what we're doing now, because it is very different, is January 23.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that takes some courage, doesn't it, to throw that away and try not to remain too attached to that, because that could be quite easy to just sort of want to hold on to at least some elements of it, right?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think I think it's sometimes I think just sometimes you have decisions you don't like either of the options, but neither of options are any good, and I think one thing I am good at doing is making decisions, and as soon as you realise, and it's that awful sinking feeling, you feel literally sick, like you want to vomit, and you're like, oh wow, we've just got this completely wrong, and the only option we have. We went through, it wasn't a decision made haphazardly. I'm very lucky that because of my time working in banking and technology, I've quite a lot of really competent CTO friends and other such things. I called a few people up and I was like, right, this is the situation, what the hell do I do? And I'm just very, very fortunate that I had access to really smart people who are truth tellers, who told me what I didn't want to hear but was the truth. And as soon as you've then got to the bottom of it, it might not be what you want to happen, but at least you have clarity. And you then just need to go, right. Yeah. It's just got to go for it.
I mean, that you're so fortunate, like you said, to have curated those people around you, because if it's so difficult to get the the honest truth from people on things like that, because people are just so terrified of, well, just telling you what you don't want to hear, and for so many founders that I know, obviously I'm known as the no bullshit guy, right? So when people work with me, I pride myself on telling them, not, if it's warranted, not just for the sake of it, if it's warranted, to tell them what I believe no one's told them up to that point, in the same way that, a Simon Cowell back in the day in X Factor would say, sorry, love, you can't sing. It's like, it's the same kind of thing. Sometimes that's needed. But it's very rare. Like, it is really, really rare, like, even to the point of our own friends and family quite often will, they don't want to hurt our feelings, or sometimes the opposite is true too. Actually, I've known a lot of situations where friends and family are actively actually be overly negative because they don't want that person to fail. So they're actively telling them not to pursue the entrepreneurial dream. Just go and get a job, So I suppose it works both ways, but it sounds like you were very fortunate to have that, because it is, like I said, it's very, very rare.
I think it's interesting to hear you say that, because I kind of reflect on friendships, and I don't know how it's happened, but actually when I hear you say that, I have really good truth teller friends. I value kind of integrity and honesty, not brutal honesty, but just and I think a lot of that comes from self-esteem. I think if you have a solid sense of self-esteem, people are more comfortable telling you the truth. And I think that's, again, particularly as an entrepreneur, it goes back, and a part of it's growth mindset maybe as well, which is, what are you trying to achieve? You're not trying to be right, you're trying to do right. And so when I think about growth mindset, for me, that's the definition. It's somebody who, and again, in banking, you come across a lot of people who will do the wrong thing to appear to be right, which for me always...
All right, so that abruptly ended there because we got disconnected for some reason. But that was, as I was just explaining before I click record again, we were coming up to the end of part one anyway. So that is the end of part one. So thank you for those who are listening and watching. We are going to get really into it now, I think, a bit more about MyArk and what it is now. You were just explaining kind of how it moved from one phase to another. Basically, you scrapped kind of 6 months worth of work. So I'm keen to find out what you then went into and started building. So we're going to do that in part two. So that'll be out in a few days for those listening and watching. So stay tuned, subscribe, all that nonsense, so you get alerted when that comes out. End of part one.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Subscribe with notifications turned on to get notified when part two comes out. While you wait, please join in the conversation in the comments below.